On a cold night in 1944, in the dark waters of the English Channel, something strange began to happen. One by one, German U-boats moved silently through the sea, their commanders confident, experienced, and unaware that anything was wrong. These submarines were among the most feared weapons of the war, designed to strike unseen and vanish without a trace. But on this night, something was different. 15 U-boats entered the channel under cover of darkness. Their mission was clear: disrupt Allied preparations, gather intelligence, and, if possible, strike at the massive invasion force that was quietly assembling across the water. The Germans knew something big was coming, but they didn't know when or where. What they didn't know was that they were already being watched. There were no enemy ships on the horizon, no aircraft overhead, no sonar pings warning of danger. The sea was calm, almost eerily quiet. Inside the submarines, everything appeared normal. Instruments showed nothing unusual. No alarms were triggered, no signs of detection. To the crews, it was just another patrol. And then, silence. No distress calls were ever received, no final transmissions, no desperate warnings sent back to Germany. One moment, these U-boats were advancing through the channel. The next, they were simply gone. Allied records would later confirm something astonishing. Those U-boats had crossed an invisible line, something placed deep beneath the surface of the sea. It wasn't a wall you could see or touch or detect with any conventional equipment of the time, yet it knew they were there. This was not luck. It was not coincidence. It was part of a carefully planned defense designed in absolute secrecy, a system so subtle that even the most advanced German naval technology could not detect it. A silent watcher on the ocean floor, waiting patiently for the enemy to pass overhead. As each submarine crossed this unseen boundary, a signal was triggered. Somewhere, far from the darkness of the channel, Allied operators received confirmation another U-boat had entered the trap. Coordinates were marked, movements tracked. The hunters now knew exactly where their prey was. For the crews inside those submarines, there was no warning, no sudden realization of danger. Just the quiet hum of machinery, the creak of metal under pressure, and the endless blackness of the sea. They had no idea they had already been marked. What followed would remain one of the most secret operations of the war, a coordinated response that turned the English Channel into a deadly barrier. Mines, patrols, and rapid attacks would soon converge on precise locations, locations revealed not by chance, but by something hidden beneath the waves. By morning, 15 U-boats had vanished. No wreckage was immediately found, no survivors returned, just empty space where some of Germany's most dangerous weapons had once been. For years, the exact details of what happened that night remained classified, buried along with the submarines themselves. But the truth was far more unsettling than any direct attack. The ocean had not simply swallowed them. They had been detected, tracked, and destroyed by something they could neither see nor understand. An invisible wall in the sea. And this was only the beginning. By early 1944, the war at sea had reached a critical turning point. The Battle of the Atlantic had already claimed thousands of ships and lives, stretching from the icy waters near Greenland to the narrow, heavily defended English Channel. For years, German U-boats had dominated these waters, hunting Allied convoys and cutting off vital supply lines. They were fast, stealthy, and deadly, earning a reputation as the silent predators of the deep. But now, everything was about to change. Across southern England, an enormous military operation was quietly taking shape. Troops, tanks, landing craft, and supplies were gathering in numbers never seen before. This was the build-up to D-Day, the Allied invasion that would open a new front in Western Europe. Its success depended on one crucial factor: control of the English Channel. If German U-boats were allowed to operate freely in these waters, the invasion could be devastated before it even began. A single successful attack on the tightly packed invasion fleet could cause chaos, destroy landing ships, and delay or even cancel the operation. The stakes could not have been higher. The German Navy, the Kriegsmarine, understood this. U-boat commanders were ordered to increase patrols, gather intelligence, and strike whenever possible. They didn't know the exact date or location of the invasion, but they knew it was coming, and they were determined to stop it. Yet the English Channel was no longer the open hunting ground it had once been. Unlike the vast Atlantic, the Channel was narrow, shallow, and heavily defended. Every mile of water was being watched. Allied forces had turned it into a layered defensive zone filled with patrol ships, aircraft, radar stations, minefields, and listening devices. It was no longer just a stretch of sea. It was a battlefield engineered for detection and control. To the German crews, however, much of this remained invisible. When U-boats entered the Channel, they still relied on the same tactics that had served them well in the open ocean: stealth, patience, and surprise. They traveled mostly at night, surfaced when possible to recharge batteries, and avoided areas where enemy activity was expected. Their instruments scanned for threats, but those instruments had limits. They could detect ships, sonar pulses, and radio signals, but not everything. What they didn't realize was that the Allies had begun to shift the balance of the war using technologies that operated silently and constantly, systems that didn't chase submarines, but waited for them. Beneath the surface of the Channel, an unseen network was already in place. It didn't rely on chance encounters or visual sightings. It didn't need to search. Instead, it transformed the entire area into a controlled zone where movement itself could be detected. For the Allies, this meant something revolutionary. They no longer had to find the U-boats. They could let the U-boats come to them. And as more German submarines entered the Channel in those tense days before the invasion, they were unknowingly moving deeper into a trap that had been carefully prepared over months. Every route they might take had been studied. Every likely approach had been considered. To the commanders inside those submarines, the mission seemed routine. But in reality, they were entering one of the most heavily monitored and defended stretches of water in the world, a place where the rules of naval warfare had quietly changed, a place where being unseen no longer meant being undetected. And waiting beneath them, hidden in the silence of the seabed, was the system that would soon turn the tide completely. What made this invisible barrier possible was not a single weapon, but a quiet breakthrough in detection, something that did not rely on sight, sound, or direct contact. Instead, it relied on a simple fact of physics. Any large metal object moving through the Earth's magnetic field leaves a trace. Beneath the waters of the English Channel, the British had installed a network of cables known as indicator loops. These cables lay flat on the seabed, stretching across key routes like unseen tripwires. They carried no obvious signal, produced no noise, and revealed nothing of their presence. To any ship or submarine passing above, the ocean seemed completely ordinary. But it wasn't. As a steel-hulled U-boat moved through the water, it subtly disturbed the natural magnetic field around it. This disturbance was incredibly small, far too small for the submarine's own instruments to detect, but the indicator loops were designed specifically to notice these changes. The moment a U-boat passed over one of these cables, the system registered it instantly. Somewhere on shore, in a quiet control room far from the front lines, operators watched their instruments closely. When a loop was triggered, it sent a signal, clear, precise, and immediate. A submarine had just crossed a specific point. Its presence was no longer a mystery. This was the genius of the system. It didn't try to hunt the U-boats in the vastness of the ocean. It turned the ocean itself into a detection grid. Instead of searching blindly, Allied forces could now monitor exact locations where submarines were passing. And the Germans had no idea. U-boat crews trusted their stealth. Their vessels were designed to avoid sonar, to slip past patrols, to remain unseen even in hostile waters. But the indicator loops didn't emit sonar. They didn't send out signals that could be detected or avoided. They simply waited. To the men inside the submarines, nothing changed. There was no warning sound, no flicker on a screen, no indication that anything had happened at all. They crossed the line just as they had crossed countless others before, quietly, confidently, and completely unaware. But in that moment, they had been found. The information from the loops did not act alone. It was fed into a larger system of coastal defenses. Once a submarine's position was known, Allied forces could respond with precision. Patrol ships could be directed to the exact area. Aircraft could be sent to search above. Mines could already be waiting in the submarine's path. It was a coordinated web, with the indicator loops acting as the trigger. And timing was everything. The closer it got to the launch of Operation Overlord, the more critical this system became. The Allies could not afford uncertainty. They needed to know with absolute confidence whether German submarines were entering the channel and exactly where they were. The invisible wall provided that certainty. It transformed the channel from a dangerous unknown into a controlled environment. Every crossing could be tracked. Every movement could be anticipated. The advantage of stealth, once held by the U-boats, was slipping away. Yet for the German commanders, none of this was visible. They continued their missions as planned, navigating through waters that seemed no different from any other. They relied on experience, discipline, and technology, but all of it was now being quietly outmatched. Because beneath them, hidden in silence, was a system designed not to be seen, not to be heard, but to know. And once it knew, it never forgot.
The trap did not spring all at once. It unfolded quietly, methodically, as each U-boat crossed the unseen boundary beneath the channel. One after another, they moved into position, unaware that their exact locations had already been recorded. In Allied control rooms, the signals began to arrive. A loop triggered, then another, and another. Each alert marked a submarine passing overhead, its path, its direction, its timing. What had once been guesswork was now certainty. The commanders coordinating the defense of the channel could see the pattern forming in real time. Multiple U-boats were entering the same controlled zone. They didn't need to search anymore. They only needed to act. Orders were issued with precision. Patrol vessels were redirected to specific coordinates. Escort ships adjusted their routes. Aircraft prepared for immediate deployment. And beneath the surface, in carefully planned positions, minefields waited silently. The response was not chaotic. It was calculated. Timing was everything. Striking too early might alert the remaining submarines. Waiting too long could allow them to slip through. The goal was to contain them, to turn the channel into a closed system where every movement led deeper into danger. For the U-boat crews, the night remained deceptively calm. Inside the submarines, routines continued: navigation checks, battery levels, quiet conversations between crew members. Some may have believed they were successfully slipping past Allied defenses. Others may have sensed tension, knowing how critical these waters had become. But none of them knew the truth. They had already been marked. Then, without warning, the silence began to break. In some areas, mines detonated with sudden, overwhelming force, violent bursts of pressure that tore through steel hulls in an instant. In others, Allied ships moved into position and released depth charges, sending shock waves through the water, collapsing hulls and flooding compartments within seconds. Above, aircraft scanned the surface, ready to strike if a submarine was forced to emerge. There was no single moment of attack, no unified battle line, just a series of precise, localized strikes, each one guided by the information provided by the invisible detection system below. The effect was devastating. Submarines that believed they were undetected found themselves hit with sudden, overwhelming force. There was little time to react, little chance to escape. Communication was limited and in many cases impossible. A submerged U-boat under attack could not easily send a distress signal without revealing its position further, or it was destroyed before any signal could be sent at all. One by one, they disappeared. No coordinated warning went back to German command, no clear explanation of what had gone wrong, just silence where experienced crews and advanced machines had once operated. By the end of the night, 15 U-boats had been eliminated. Not through a visible fleet engagement, not through a chance encounter, but through a system that combined detection, timing, and overwhelming response, turning the channel into a controlled killing zone. For the Allies, it was proof that their strategy was working. The invisible wall had done its job. It had identified the threat, guided the response, and removed it with precision. For Germany, it was something far more confusing, because from their perspective, those submarines had simply vanished.
By the time the sun rose over the English Channel, the threat had been quietly removed. The waters that had once been a hunting ground for German submarines were now under firm Allied control. And just days later, that control would prove decisive. On June 6, 1944, the largest amphibious invasion in history began, D-Day. Thousands of ships crossed the Channel, carrying troops, vehicles, and supplies toward the beaches of Normandy. It was a moment that would change the course of the war. But what made that crossing possible was not just the size of the invasion force, it was the absence of a threat that had once been deadly. German U-boats, which had terrorized Allied shipping for years, were largely missing from the battlefield at the most critical moment. The narrow waters of the Channel, once vulnerable, had been transformed into a secured corridor. The invisible detection systems, minefields, and coordinated defenses had done more than stop individual submarines. They had reshaped the entire environment of the war at sea. This was a crucial factor in the success of Operation Overlord. Without constant fear of submarine attack, Allied planners could move massive numbers of ships in tight formations. Troop transports, landing craft, and supply vessels crossed with a level of confidence that would have been unthinkable just a year earlier. The risk had not disappeared entirely, but it had been reduced to a level that could be managed. And much of that was because of systems the enemy never even knew existed. The invisible wall was not a single barrier, but part of a broader transformation in naval warfare during the Battle of the Atlantic. Technology, coordination, and intelligence were beginning to outweigh traditional advantages like stealth and surprise. The ocean was no longer an open, uncontrollable space. It was becoming something that could be monitored, measured, and controlled. For years after the war, the details of these systems remained classified. The cables on the seabed, the detection methods, the coordination behind the scenes, all of it was kept secret. Even as new technologies emerged, the principles behind them remained the same. Detect without being detected, and act before the enemy even knows you're there. The story of the missing U-boats became just a fragment of a much larger picture, one that was only fully understood decades later. Today, we often think of warfare in terms of visible power, tanks, ships, aircraft, and weapons. But some of the most decisive advantages come from things that cannot be seen at all. Signals moving through cables, data interpreted in quiet rooms, systems operating silently, shaping events from the shadows. On that night in 1944, 15 submarines crossed a line they didn't know existed. They never saw it, they never heard it, but it saw them. And in the end, that made all the difference.